Well, could you compare it all between like the conscious ego versus the unconsciousness? I mean, is it more like the unconscious part, the true essence of that person or that identity that then reincarnates into another life, not without all the solid underpinnings of the ego?
In normal people, the extremely subtle, let's call it the soul gene of the normal person, is also a changing, subtle process. Just like genes themselves change, they're affected by their environment, right? You have like decrepit genes, freaked out genes, carcinogenic genes, and all. Genes are not a rigid thing that just hop along from like being to being. They change, and so the soul gene also always changes that subtle thing, and the normal person is unconscious of that subtle thing. That yes, but it isn't that unconscious. No, the self-centered, the self-absolutization identity habit is conscious and unconscious levels. It's the unconscious level that then feels like instinct to a person. But the Buddhist regime of self-transformation aims to transform that, not just the conscious level. They have, for example, conscious egotism and unconscious egotism. For example, they have such analyses. Conscious misknowledge or ignorance and unconscious misknowledge or ignorance. And the soul gene is imprinted and trapped by the unconscious ignorance, in fact, which is why one is driven in the rebirth process by blind impulse, by blind attraction or aversion, hatred or desire, and born here and there without being able to choose the circumstances of birth. Normal person. The reincarnation, supposedly, in the Tibetan thing, is a being that is free of that deep inner thing, and therefore can actually consciously maneuver the relativities of being reborn and choose a rebirth or not choose a rebirth, actually. You can choose to live in the heavenly planes as long as they like, in fact. And so according to their science of this whole thing. You follow me? So the selflessness means, and the Tibetans are especially good at the way they've elaborated that the last 1,000 years in their continuation of the Indian Abhidharma. But the Indians did too. Selflessness means no absolute self. It doesn't mean no relative self. And in the Pali text, Buddha says, he who is in control of himself is a saintly person and goes like a rhinoceros in the woods and meditates and attains nirvana. And then he says, by realizing there's no self, who is in control of himself. I mean, he uses self in a conventional way referring to himself, and he uses self in an absolute way where he rejects it, where he critiques it. But that's often not elaborated clearly, and people, even ancient Indian, not just Westerners, think that, those Buddhists are nihilistic, they have no soul, and then therefore they're almost like and there were Indian materialists. In that ancient period, there were people who were like our modern-day scientific materialists who said there's no future life and former life that's just invented by some priests who get donations. It's a bunch of bull. I love actually one thing they said. If the priest can send, cookies and candies and offerings through the fire to the ancestors in heaven in offering ceremonies, why are they only giving them a little bit at a time? Why don't they throw in the whole harvest and then let them jump in themselves and go straight to heaven through the fire? And leave us alone to have fun here in our materialist, pleasure-seeking world. Very humorous, I thought. I really like that.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
So, but the Hindus still thought that the Buddhists were like that. They were nihilists, too. And they were freaking out, And so the Buddhists, by being in the middle between the people who are practical, causality analyzing, and not naive spiritualists, critiquing naive spiritualism, naive materialism, in the middle, no absolute self, yes, conventional self. They were misperceived by both sides, as people in the middle always are.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think I understand.
Nagarjuna has a wonderful thing where people challenge him and they say, look, if all this is empty, then there's no birth and death and nothing. What is this, Mm-hmm. And he says, he gives them some teasing. He gives them like 12 critical words in four verses for first. But then he says, finally, if all this were not empty, there would be no birth and no death and no this and no that. So emptiness meaning that there's no non-relative component in anything, means that everything is totally relative, and therefore there is this continuum, and there are these things, and there is becoming stuck in an unenlightened suffering state, and there is becoming free of that in a Buddhahood condition, which is also a relative. Being a Buddha is a relative thing, relative to being a not Buddha. You know, although both are the same on the ultimate level, they're both free, equally free. But a Buddha knows that, and a non-Buddha doesn't.